Adolf Hitler hated the Russians and most of the nationalities that made up the USSR. Though before the war, he had a grudging respect for the Russian dictator Josef Stalin. He viewed the United States with contempt, calling America an internally rotting and decadent democracy, and its population as being mongrelized and bastardized. To Hitler and the Nazis, Franklin Roosevelt and what the Nazis called the ruling clique of the USA were plutocrats, willing to sell their souls for a profit. As you can likely imagine, this led Hitler and his propaganda minister Josef Goebbels to frequently call FDR by the German Jewish name Rosenfeld, though Roosevelt's roots were Dutch, as was the name. He loathed the French as Germany's eternal enemies and had fought on the Western Front against them in World War I. He believed that the French were a remotely Germanic people, but who had become soft under the influence of American cosmopolitanism. Jazz music, the spirit of the 1920s, and the acceptance of many French of what Hitler and the Nazis called black culture, though they used a different term not allowed by YouTube. Hitler's opinion of the British people was mixed. He greatly respected Britain's military power, especially its navy, and envied, like many nationalist Germans before World War I, World War II, the size of the British Empire. He also believed that as a Germanic, the British should have a role in the new order that he intended to build. As the Depression went on before World War II, and after Hitler came into power in 1933, Germany promoted fascism, Nazism to the UK, especially in England, and was partially to blame for the rise of the British Union of Fascists, led by minor aristocrat Oswald Mosley, who was imprisoned for most of World War II. The focus of Hitler's hatred towards England was its wartime leader, Winston Churchill, whom in actuality Hitler should have respected, for Churchill had been a war hero many times before Hitler was high school age. Most historians agree that the primary reason Hitler hated Churchill was simple. Churchill hated Hitler and Nazism, and rallied England to resist. But what did World War II dictators think of each other? And what did Hitler think about his allies? You're about to find out. Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was Hitler's longest-lasting and most steadfast ally, at least before the war and in its first 3 or so years. Mussolini's march on Rome in 1922 led Hitler to decide to stage the infamous and unsuccessful Munich Beer Hall Putsch in 1923. Though Hitler undoubtedly had his own speaking style and was a much more effective speaker, Mussolini was the man upon whom Hitler modeled his basic speaking style. What many people don't know is that for the first 2+ years of Hitler's rule, he and Mussolini had some serious disagreements. Most of these concerned Hitler's desire to control or annex Austria, which bordered Italy. Despite sharing a basic political ideology, Mussolini did not want a powerful Germany to be on his northern border. Moreover, there was a sizable German-speaking population along the Italian-Austrian border. From time to time in his rise to power and in his first years as chancellor, Hitler made statements alluding to including the German-speaking minority in Italy within the Greater German Reich, something that Mussolini vehemently opposed and vaguely threatened to go to war over in July 1934, when an unsuccessful Nazi-inspired uprising took place in Austria. This mini-crisis ended when Hitler, understanding that Germany was still a weakened country, stated that the Germans in Italy would remain Italian citizens. Interestingly, one of the men who participated in the 1934 Nazi attempt to seize Austria was native Austrian Otto Skorzeny, who later became Hitler's favorite commando during the war. One reason why? It was Otto Skorzeny who led the daring mission to rescue Mussolini in 1943. The most well-known saying about Mussolini is that he got Italy's trains to run on time, a notoriously tricky proposition. Still, there wasn't much else that Mussolini got right, especially after he and Hitler formed the Rome-Berlin Axis on October 25, 1936. In a way, Mussolini was a lot like Lando Calrissian in The Empire Strikes Back, when he realizes that Darth Vader has no intention of honoring the deal they made.
This deal is getting worse all the time.
Personally, the two dictators got along. Mussolini spoke German well enough, though Hitler had trouble understanding it and criticized it in private. Like many other people who knew him, Hitler regarded Mussolini as a bit of a loudmouth and a braggart. As the years went by and Mussolini's power lessened, the boasts of Italy's military power and the dictator's hold on the country rang more hollow in Hitler's ears. In 1936, Mussolini embarked on his attempt to restore the Roman Empire, at least in Africa, by attacking Ethiopia. In 1940, Italian troops in their colony of Libya attacked the British in Egypt. Though Hitler offered military aid after the first Italian setbacks, they were initially refused by Mussolini, who wanted to prove to Hitler, the Italian people, and the world that Italy was a strong and capable military power, which it was not. In 1941, Hitler sent the famous Africa Corps under Rommel to help the Italians in Africa. He had to help the Italians the year before as well. After Hitler's successes against Poland, the Low Countries, and France, Mussolini became quite envious and worried that he would become a junior partner in the Axis. In early April 1939, Mussolini took over the tiny, poor, and backward country of Albania, just across the Adriatic Sea from Italy. The next year, Mussolini unwisely invaded Greece, was forced to retreat, and finally asked Hitler for help in subduing the Greeks. The whole Greek episode cost Hitler more than the lives of his troops. It delayed his timetable for his planned invasion of the Soviet Union and forced him to send troops into Yugoslavia to get to Greece. This resulted in one of the most extensive and savage guerrilla campaigns of the war, and ultimately involved hundreds of thousands of German soldiers, ones that could have aided Hitler in the invasion of the USSR. What was worse in Hitler's mind was that Mussolini kept his plans for Greece a secret from him. By late 1941, Hitler and most Germans in and out of the armed forces regarded the Italian army and its much vaunted navy as incompetent, corrupt, lazy, and lacking in martial spirit. Though there were exceptions, most Germans fighting alongside Italian units during the war would rather have been anywhere else. Still, though Hitler wasn't the idolizing schoolboy in Mussolini's presence that pre- and post-World War II journalists and historians made out, the German dictator did admire the Italian for many years, credited him with the rise of fascism, and was mesmerized by Mussolini's speaking ability, which in the first years rivaled Hitler's own. Despite everything that happened in World War II, Mussolini was one of the few people Hitler remained loyal to during the war. Hitler ordered the famous commando-style rescue of the Italian leader after he had been overthrown in 1943, and set him up with a fascist puppet state in northern Italy, where he ruled until he was killed by Italian partisans in 1945. Japan. On the surface, the relationship between Hitler's Germany and Japan is one of the strangest partnerships there has ever been. Perhaps both nations had the luxury of forgetting some of the critical elements of their wartime and political policies. Hitler, the racist, who seemingly regarded any people not of the Germanic branch of the human family as inferior, and while many people don't realize it, the Japanese had their own version of racial superiority, as witnessed by their abysmal treatment of the people in the countries they occupied, most notoriously in China, where their stated policy was called the Three Alls Policy: kill all, burn all, loot all. Had Japan shared a natural or conquered border with Germany, their relationship may have been different. But Berlin is 5,540 miles as the crow flies from Tokyo. It's even stranger when you consider that Germany was a Chinese ally and Japanese enemy during World War I and into the 30s. Germany supplied China with millions of dollars in military aid, including the infamous German coal scuttle helmets worn by Chinese nationalist troops in the first years of their war against Japan, which began years before World War II broke out in Europe. But despite Hitler's writings in his infamous book, Mein Kampf, published in 1925-26, in which he said that Japan's place as an industrialized and powerful nation was due to its adopting Western technology, and that if the West ceased to be, Japan could not copy Western economic and industrial ideas. It would disappear. Hitler and the Nazis did respect the Japanese in two important ways. First, they respected the samurai spirit of offensive war embodied by the fascist rulers of Japan, the military. Second, Hitler valued what he thought of as the unity of the Japanese nation, meaning that Japan was populated and ruled by one person, the Japanese, even though there was a small indigenous population, the Ainu, in northern Japan and a sizable Korean minority. One of Hitler's most perplexing decisions came on December 11, 1941. 4 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Hitler declared war on the United States. Japan, Italy, and Germany formed the Tripartite Pact in 1940, which called for close economic and military cooperation, which in actuality was very limited. Still, it was not a mutual defense pact. Hitler did not have to declare war on the USA, But though historians still puzzle over his decision, it's relatively easy to understand at least parts of his thinking. Hitler did not need to declare war on the US. Even after Pearl Harbor, many Americans, while slowly realizing the threat posed to them and their close ally England, still believed that the United States should remain out of the war in Europe, unless they were attacked. As both Roosevelt and Churchill rightly and fortunately knew, the entry of the United States into the war spelled Hitler's doom. Even though German troops were being stopped in front of Moscow in early December 1941, Hitler still held most of Europe in his grip, a massive chunk of the Western USSR and parts of Africa. His main enemy in Europe was Great Britain, and Great Britain had extensive possessions in Asia. On the very day the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, they also attacked American, British, and Dutch possessions in Asia and the Pacific. Hitler favored anything that would weaken Britain and stretch their forces to the limit. Hitler also believed that war with the United States was inevitable and was likely hoping that before the industrial might of the US could reach maximum output, the Americans would either be decisively defeated or forced to negotiate from a position of weakness. Hitler and General Hideki Tojo, the Japanese premier for most of World War II, never met. It's interesting to think about what that encounter might have looked like. But from what we know of Hitler's meetings with Japanese ambassadors and other diplomats, any meeting between Hitler and Tojo would likely have remained quite formal, given the relatively short length of any meeting and the deep cultural and language barriers. Other allies. During the war, and in one case before, Hitler had other allies, some closer than others. The two largest, at least politically and geographically, were Spain and Finland. Finland had been close to Germany long before Hitler came to power, a possession of the Russian Tsar from 1721 to 1918. During World War I, many Finns came to regard Germany as an ally in their struggle to throw off Russian rule. At the end of the First World War, the new communist government under Lenin agreed to Finnish independence, though it did sponsor an armed Finnish communist movement in the hopes of spreading communism westward without shedding too much Soviet-Russian blood to do so. During World War I, a few thousand Finns joined the Imperial German Army and fought on the Western Front. One man who fought with the Russians was their post-World War I leader, Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Mannerheim, an ethnic Swedish-German aristocrat whose family had moved to Finland in the late 1700s, who, while immensely popular with most Finns, never spoke Finnish well. After Finnish independence, Mannerheim led the anti-communist forces in the Finnish Civil War and was victorious. The Finnish people are not Germanic Scandinavians like the Swedes, Norwegians, and Danes, but their stereotypical tall, blonde, white appearance, Western culture, and affinity for Germany all led Hitler to look favorably on the Finns as fellow Aryans, not honorary Aryans like he designated the Japanese, and several allied foreign leaders. For example, Romanian strongman Ion Antonescu, another German ally, like Hungary and Bulgaria, that would reluctantly join the Nazis in their war against the USSR, at least until the tide of battle turned. The one German ally that Hitler actually liked was Mannerheim, though in private, Hitler often spoke of the German and some other Western European nobility as a group whose privilege was unwarranted. He was often seen, especially before the war, as curiously differential to them. Hitler met Mannerheim personally less than a handful of times. Mannerheim initially became interested in what was happening in Germany in 1933 and visited the country in 1934 but did not meet Hitler. In 1938, he met with Hitler at Berchtesgaden, but no extensive account of the meeting exists. It must have gone reasonably well, even though by that time Mannerheim had become fully aware of what was going on in Germany and disliked it intensely. Despite his impression of the Nazi regime, Mannerheim was cordial to Hitler, and though many people have written about Mannerheim's reserved behavior towards Hitler, they forget that that was the way Mannerheim behaved with almost everyone. He was also Swedish and an aristocrat, and behaved in the way you'd expect, quietly and calmly. In many of the photos of them together, Hitler is wearing a wide grin. You can detect a slight, closed-mouthed smile on Mannerheim. Though Hitler respected Mannerheim and the fighting ability of the Finns in the Winter War, they had fought when Stalin invaded their country in late 1939, a war that the Nazi-Soviet Pact of August 1939 had allowed to happen. He was not happy with two things. First, as a condition of joining with Hitler against Stalin, Mannerheim declared that Finnish troops would not attack into territory that had not been theirs before Stalin's partially successful invasion, and that Finland would not, under any circumstances, turn over its Jews to Hitler. What's more, he told Hitler that any attempt by German troops in Finland fighting the Soviets to harm Finnish Jews would result in Finland declaring war against the Germans. In 1942, with the war against Stalin becoming a nightmare for Hitler, he went to Finland to celebrate Mannerheim's 75th birthday and discuss the war. The meeting is famous for several reasons, but the prime reason is that it was secretly recorded by a German radio technician. Before Hitler's security found the microphone, 11 minutes of his and Mannerheim's conversation was recorded. Though it's only 11 minutes of a meeting that lasted hours, it's not hard to imagine that it continued the same way, with Hitler talking incessantly about the unexpected size and industrial power of the Soviet Union. To most of what we hear Hitler say, Mannerheim offers brief agreements, but not much else. Mannerheim also refused a request by Hitler to expand Finland's war into the USSR. By 1944, Hitler was losing the war, and the Red Army was driving westward. Though its progress in northeastern Finland was slow, the Red Army was moving in, and more troops were entering the country daily. Mannerheim and the Finns realized what was about to happen, and, while they still could, made a deal with Stalin that allowed him to keep Finland independent, as long as they turned on German troops in the country, which they did, harrying them to the Finnish coast, where a few thousand managed to be sea-lifted back to Germany. The last of Germany's most prominent allies was Spain and its fascist leader, Franco, who remained the last officially fascist ruler in the world until he died in 1975. Hitler had sent massive amounts of money and military aid to help Franco against the socialist, communist, and democratic opponents in the 1936-39 Spanish Civil War, including advisors and a sizable number of fighter planes and bombers known as the Condor Legion. In 1941, he expected a significant return on his investment. Hitler left his October 23, 1940 meeting with Franco in the south of France, mumbling that he would rather have teeth pulled than ever try to negotiate with Franco again. Though the Spanish dictator eventually sent nearly 50,000 men to fight in the Soviet Union with the Germans, that number was a mere drop in the bucket of what he could have done and what Hitler expected. They never met again.